Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So, as usual, let me take you through the monetary policy and our views on the market. I also wanted to touch upon global macro as always. A lot of flux, lot of things happening. So, let's get started. So, as you know, RBI and Monetary Policy Committee kept rates and stance the same, which is pretty much as per market expectation. More so, the governor also made a very explicit and forward-looking commitment on liquidity. So it looks like, and we are seeing in action since December, that RBI has gotten more proactive with respect to liquidity management. So the governor's statement basically says that they will provide adequate liquidity, adjusted for swings in government cash balance, adjusted for currency in circulation, adjusted for FX operations, etc., which is obviously a very comforting statement as far as the market is concerned. However, unlike market expectations, there were no incremental steps on liquidity that were announced. And I'll get into that as well in a bit. So, for whatever reasons, going into the policy, there were enough and more market expectations that RBI will continue to infuse liquidity, including through open market purchase of bonds. But like I said, although the governor was very forthcoming in assuring the market that enough and more liquidity will be provided, there were no actual incremental steps that were taken. Frankly, we have been a little surprised why market expectation was so strong getting into the policy, because if you add up the additional liquidity measures RBI has taken since December, they actually add up to quite a bit. So since December and ending yesterday, the RBI has undertaken 4 lakh crores of additional open market operation or open market purchase of bonds. They have done $25 billion worth of FX swaps that has infused another close to 2,25,000 crores of liquidity. And then they have also infused 90-day VRR, almost 1,35,000 from that, although that is very temporary liquidity. However, if you add up all these steps, it's a very significant chunk of additional liquidity that the RBI has provided. So earlier the issue used to be that because FX operations were also very large, which means that in order to maintain rupee depreciation at a reasonable level, the RBI has been continually selling dollars and buying rupees or sucking out INR liquidity. So earlier, the pace of liquidity generation was struggling to keep up with the pace of liquidity bleed. But since December, and especially now, we are beginning to see that effect over the last 7-10 days. The RBI is now completely on top of the problem, so that now the system is heavily surplus liquidity for now, despite previous FX operations. Let me just run you through a bit of calculation there. As per our calculations, what we call core system liquidity, which is accounting for cash that is trapped as government cash balance with the RBI. So what we term as core system liquidity was roughly 3,50,000 crore positive as of 15th of January. And if we add all the liquidity steps RBI has undertaken via OMOs and FX swaps since 15th of January, and if we deduct normal leakages that happened, first of all, on currency in circulation, we have assumed around 1,60,000, 1,70,000 crores of leakage on currency in circulation, as well as some leakage on CRR maintenance. We still get a system liquidity number or core system liquidity number, which is close to 5 lakh crores as of end of March. So even if government cash balances were to swing around a bit, it's unlikely that from here on, the headline system liquidity will turn negative for any sustained period of time till the end of this financial year. So the point being, the good part of this point is that RBI is very much on top of provision of liquidity now, and the forward-looking commitment on this is very strong also. The not so good point is, why exactly was market so gung-ho about further liquidity measures when probably very few were required, and therefore the disappointment that has ensued because of that. Now, if you break down market expectation from RBI after all the measures undertaken, you could basically slot them into three parts. First part is there has been an expectation that despite RBI having done enough on core liquidity, they should continue to do open market purchase of bonds to manage bond deals. We completely disagree with this theory, but let me explain our point of view and what the market point of view on this has been. So the argument is that bond yields have been sticky and not been able to fall for the last 1 year, despite RBI having done rate cuts. And therefore, in order to have transmission, you have to make bond yields fall. And therefore, RBI should continue to do open market operation purchases of bonds. Like I said, we completely disagree with this theory, and our logic is as follows. First of all, over the last 1 odd year, RBI has effectively purchased bonds worth almost 75% of net central government bond issuances. So almost 75% of what the government of India has issued on a net basis over the last 1 year, equivalent amount RBI has bought under OMOs. Now, all these OMOs were required from a liquidity management standpoint. So we are not criticizing what the RBI has done as OMOs. We are merely noting that RBI has been the biggest buyer of government bonds over the last 1 year by far. And obviously, this state cannot continue for too long. So as the requirement of core system liquidity diminishes, or additional requirement to infuse core system liquidity diminishes, RBI should justifiably scale back OMOs and allow commercial demand and supply to take its place. So if despite buying 75% worth of net government bond issuances and cutting rates, this is where market yields are at, clearly they are reflecting other factors as well that all of us have to respect, including commercial demand and supply, so the appetite of the bond market, as well as global factors. So one of the things that we have not understood about this is why should market want yields to fall when globally bond yields are rising? Because even though most of the Indian bond market is owned by locals, it's not as if there are not other avenues of transmission. So, lower rate differential between India and many developed markets probably is also one of the attributable reasons why, outward FDI is stronger, as an example. Or, the channel of transmission could be through the interest rate swap market, if not the government bond market. So the point is, we are a connected economy to the rest of the world. And even though the local bond market is largely domestically financed, we can't ignore what is happening in the rest of the world as well. So long story short, we do believe that there is a certain utility of OMOs that has been met. RBI has provided enough core liquidity, and from here on, they should slow OMOs and step back and allow commercial demand and supply to meet and decide the level of bond deals. The other risk with continuing OMOs, even when liquidity does not demand it, is that at some juncture, it will start to smell like debt monetization. Now, what is debt monetization? It is basically, the way I mean it in this context is that it's purchasing bonds so that bond yields don't rise and allowing governments to therefore finance their fiscal deficits at a cost that would have been different if the central bank was not there. Now, again, to clarify, in the case of India, the government is extremely responsible fiscally. It is extremely responsible from a macroeconomic standpoint. And therefore, there is absolutely no need or desire to venture into the territory of debt monetization. Neither is the RBI doing it. So, again, to clarify, the RBI is not doing this and the government does not want it done. Both are macroeconomically conscious and responsible entities. The only point we are making is that if RBI were to give in to that part of market demand, which says that just to ensure continued transmission or lower bond yields, you continue doing OMOs even if liquidity requirement does not dictate it, then the line between doing OMOs for liquidity management and doing it for de facto debt monetization will become very blurry, and we don't need that to happen. And the third reason why we disagree with using OMOs to cap bond yields is, look at credit growth is just doing fine. Look at economic growth is just doing fine. So credit to GDP continues to rise. If anything, credit to deposit ratios are becoming somewhat stretched. And there's absolutely no reason, therefore, for RBI to think that we need to bring down the marginal cost of credit for credit growth to happen better. So to summarize this first point, where certain quarters of the bond market want transmission to happen and therefore more OMOs, we completely and respectfully disagree with. The second expectation, which we are more sympathetic to going into the policy, was that because government cash balance keeps fluctuating, and because banking is now almost 24/7, and therefore banks have to permanently park some excess liquidity under the standing deposit facility with RBI. Therefore, RBI should aim for a higher level of core system liquidity in order for the headline system liquidity to always be comfortably positive, even adjusted for standing deposit facility excess cash balances that banks are parking with RBI. Now, which is where there was an expectation that probably more OMOs or more liquidity injection could be done so that this state of affairs is consistently met. Now, there, RBI's effective counter is twofold. One is that the forward-looking guidance on liquidity remains that they are standing ready to infuse proactively and adjusted for government cash balance and so forth. And second, the liquidity calculation that I just took you through. In our view, probably RBI has already met that condition for the time being, that even if there are swings in government cash balances, the headline level of liquidity is still likely going to be comfortable, barring 1 or 2 days probably in March. The third expectation of the market was that liquidity is one thing and banks' availability of resources is another thing. So because banks are at least temporarily struggling with a higher credit to deposit ratio, and therefore the resource availability is a bit stretched, there was an expectation that some sort of liquidity coverage ratio dispensation may be forthcoming, including preponement of a guideline that is about to take effect in April, or making some CRR adjustments, etc. However, what the RBI has basically said is that what they will ensure is adequate liquidity in the system. They will not really force banks to adhere to certain credit to deposit ratios, and therefore banks can manage resources while RBI ensures that headline liquidity is comfortably positive. The governor also referred to credit to deposit problem being seasonal. So because of this, that expectation also of the market was not met. But sum and substance is, our sense is RBI is pretty much delivered on markets liquidity ask. Because RBI has been so proactive since December, in some sense, markets ask was also going up. And in some cases, chiefly, using OMOs to curtail bond deals, it was, in our view, becoming unrealistic. So one of the big takeaways from the policy today was, not just status quo on rates and probably a long hold now, but RBI saying, look, we are proactive, we have supplied enough liquidity, but maybe markets ask is a bit too much. We'll see how it goes. So that is, as far as the policy was concerned. One other takeaway from the policy is that now, as the governor is saying, you're probably on a long hold. And at some juncture during that long hold, the discussion will invariably move towards how long this hold is going to look like, which put another way is, when does RBI move from this hold to actually a hike? Now, again, don't get us wrong. We are not talking about any sort of a hike right now. In fact, we are very much comfortable with RBI's view that you are on a long hold. The only reason I mention this is that at some juncture, the next debate from the market is going to be, when does the long hold stop being a hold? And because market pricing tends to run ahead of actual changes, market will start to price in some bit of upward shift in policy rates, prior to the actual shift happening. So one point to note is, if you see the interest rate swap curve, the 2-year interest rate swap curve is beginning to price in modest hikes, not in year one, but year two, basically year 2027. So I only, mention this again to clarify, not from a standpoint that we expect any rate hikes. We are looking for a long hold from RBI, alongside, very abundantly positive liquidity. But market discussion probably, after 6 months or so, may start to head in a direction that when does the hold stop and the whatever modest hike begin. So we are pretty much at an end of cycle place, and therefore portfolio strategies, what you find as value, what you not find as value, one has to have a very sharp lookout for. I should also mention in this context, and something which we have been keenly watching since October, November, is that you could potentially say that there are some signs of global reflationary trade. Now, what do I mean by global reflationary trade? So industrial metal prices outside of gold and silver have also risen. Notwithstanding the price fall we have seen over the last 2-3 days, but if you see over the last 1 year, industrial metals like copper, tin, aluminium, etc., those prices have also risen. It's not just gold and silver anymore. Now you can say there are idiosyncratic reasons, there are supply disruptions, etc., for example, in copper. But it also could be that there is a demand element of the global manufacturing cycle beginning to pick up a bit. This was certainly corroborated by US ISM data that we got 2-3 days back, where it clearly showed a reacceleration in US manufacturing intentions. You're also seeing in the US positive data surprises really climbing outside of the employment market. So on employment market, we continue to see reasonably bad news. But if you see, how GDP momentum has picked up over Q3 and Q4, if you see industrial activity that I mentioned, if you see consumer spending, which is sustained very strongly over Q3 and Q4, despite consumers drawing down savings, and because some provisions of Trump's one big beautiful bill, which pertain to depreciation benefits, in income tax transfers, etc., they all kick in over first half of this calendar year. So there is a narrative potentially that the US growth is lifting a bit. We are watching this closely. One counterpoint to that is employment growth is not lifting, and therefore the jury is still mixed whether this sustains or not. But this combined with AI spending is something that one is watching out for, including the renewed pressure on global bond deals that we are seeing a bit. So this we are watching. We are watching the rise in industrial commodities, etc., while we wait on a long period of hold from the RBI. So the point I'm effectively making is that this is no longer a slam dunk market on fixed income. At the same time, there are enough opportunities to keep us and investors engaged. And let me, just quickly talk about these. So, what we like and what we don't like. What we like reasonably well is the front end of the non-SLR curve, which includes bank CDs, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, maybe up to 4 year corporate bonds, but largely up to 3 year AAA corporate bonds, because those yields have adjusted quite substantially, reflecting the funding challenges in the system, which are probably temporary in nature. So today you are at a place where 1 year bank CD is roughly at around 7, 2 year, 3 year AAA corporate bonds are also hovering in the 710, 720 band, which is almost 200 basis point over a repo rate, which you expect will be held for a reasonably long period of time, alongside RBI's assurance now of even more proactive liquidity management. Now, bear in mind, these yields may remain under pressure up to 31st March because of this being the busy season on credit. But from April quarter onwards, as the busy season transforms into lean season on credit, and as system liquidity probably continues to be reasonably well supplied, we do expect front-end corporate bond and bank CD yields to inch down to whatever extent we don't know yet. But this is one part of the market that we like, although one has to have a long holding horizon for this. The other aspect of our portfolio thinking right now is we want to be underweight duration, or we are underweight duration across most categories, and significantly so in some cases. The third aspect is we want to keep some cash or liquidity and quasi liquidity for the time being, given the volatility that one is experiencing in markets. Again, this is portfolio to portfolio. So some of the non-SLR portfolios may not keep that. SLR portfolios may keep that. And fourth is, we are also to some extent or have used derivatives, interest rate swaps, etc., to manage interest rate risk a bit. So in summary, one has to be more picky about where the value in the bond market is and where one does not see as much value. One has to keep some portfolio flexibilities in play. And one has to therefore be looking forward to what the next phase is going to look like. On the GSEC curve, we continue to think that once the RBI steps away to a large extent, and once the market is allowed to discover where demand and supply are meeting, that is when that will look a little better to us. At this juncture, in most portfolios, we are quite underweight government bonds. Like I said, what we like better is front end of the non-SLR curve with a sufficiently long investment horizon. Let me again caution, this is the view as of date, and it may change in the future depending upon incoming data or valuation or perspective changes. Finally, and before I end, let me just give you our perspective on a small global snapshot. See, there are two or three differences now in the global economy that one has to account for, and which were not there 3 or 4 years back. And sometimes we feel that in our investment theses, generally we don't tend to account for these to the extent that they deserve accounting for. The first is that the general level of developed market yields now is much higher than the pre-pandemic period, which is an obvious point, but it gets greatly underappreciated because in some sense, the risk-free rate of the world has moved up, and it doesn't look like that it is going to come off in a hurry. So remember when the Fed started to hike aggressively post-pandemic, a lot of views, including ours at the time, was that, look, those economies are not meant to sustain 4 or 5% rates. And soon enough, they will collapse under the weight of these rates and interest rates will have to come off again. So, a lot of, the way we used to look at bonds and valuation, etc., never accounted for developed market yields to remain at 3 or 4% for such an extended period of time. Not just that, those economies actually doing well despite rates being where they are. So look at the US, the 10-year is stuck at 4% or above. Corporate bonds there are stuck at 5% or above. Mortgage rates are stuck at 6% or above, but the economy is still humming around fine. If anything, it's actually accelerating over the last 6 months. A large part of it has to do with fiscal spending. So average fiscal deficits used to be 3.5%. They are now 6.5%. So that's a big buffer. A large part of it has to do with, the AI-driven capex, which has solidly contributed to private capex cycle in the US. And also a third piece is, asset markets have held well, and therefore the wealth effect is strong, which is allowing people to continue to consume. Whatever the reasons, you cannot dispute the fact that, at least for the time being, we think these higher developed market rates are pretty much staying. And therefore, the risk-free threshold for the world has moved up. So compared to earlier, when we think about what valuations are attractive to us, we have to incorporate that into our thinking in the bond market as well. Second, this AI trade has multiple dimensions. So, nothing I'm saying is particularly insightful. It's just stating the obvious. I'm merely, re-emphasizing the importance of that when we think about investment frameworks sitting here as well. So the AI trade, like I said, has multiple dimensions. In the real economy, or rather in the way GDP gets calculated, it is actually contributing to private sector capex in, let's say, the US. So there is the AI build-out capex that is happening, including in data centers, energy, etc., which is, keeping their GDP growth higher. Then there are productivity benefits that are probably beginning to get unleashed, which also, is arguing for higher real GDP growth rate. Then the AI narrative, as well as the debt that is now getting more and more issued around it, is also absorbing capital because, there is only so much capital going around the world. And, that narrative and the debt associated with it is also absorbing capital. So the AI trade itself has multiple dimensions, which is the second thesis that, or the second part that you have to incorporate in the thesis. And the third part is that China probably continues to sit on massive excess capacity across sectors, which has two related issues for other countries. One is that it becomes that much more harder to reduce trade deficit versus China, because they will be able to supply cheap goods and inputs, etc., to the rest of the world. And second is, it becomes that much harder to get a broad-based manufacturing capex cycle going here. So that is also something you have to keep into mind. In fact, if you see over the last 3 or 4 years, the way our trade account has been turning, the maximum expansion or a very significant expansion in trade deficit has actually happened for India with respect to the Greater China region, which is China plus Hong Kong. And that, to us looks like basically the export of excess capacity from China. So these three things, which is higher developed market yields, the AI theme, sucking capital from a lot of places, and Chinese excess capacity that continues to be exported and makes cutting trade deficit from China that much harder, also have to be kept in mind when we think about local investment thesis. So for us here, from a fixed income and macro standpoint, the number one problem is not transmission anymore. And which is why we find it curious when so much ink is spilt on people talking about transmission needing to happen more. I think with the cost of capital we are at, the economy is doing absolutely fine. As many people appreciate, the number one thing that we have to focus on is getting more capital flow into the country, because the last 2 years peculiarity has been that despite India running a current account deficit which is just about 1% of GDP, still the balance of payment has been negative, because the net capital flow into the country has not even been sufficient to cover 1% current account deficit. And probably the rise of these other investment themes around the world, which are all in play to for global capital allocation, has something to do with it. So once you start to think about the narrative in this way, at least that's how we are thinking about things this way, then you also have to appreciate that there is only so much interest rates can go down. They cannot just be a function of your inward reality, which is that for the time being your inflation is at 2% and therefore rates could be lower. But they also have to cover the global reality, which to us looks like something the way I talked about. Now, this doesn't mean that we need to worry. This just means that we have to work that much harder. We have to focus that much more on ensuring ongoing macroeconomic stability, as the RBI and government are already doing, to ensure that over a period of time we get our fair share of global capital. And again, the cost of capital at this juncture is probably one of the last things we should worry about in this whole setup. So to summarize, we are pretty much at the bottom of the rate cycle, the rate cut cycle. We expect a long hold from RBI. However, at some juncture over the next 6, 8, 9 months, probably people will start to speculate how long this hold is. Market rates tend to run ahead of market expectation really changing. So we would look for some changes to people's expectation on the way rates have to be priced. There is reasonably large GSEC plus SDL supply on a gross basis scheduled for the year ahead, amounting to something like 30 lakh crores. We don't expect RBI to play that big a role in absorbing that supply in the year ahead, simply because they've actually done quite a bit this year. They may still end up doing roughly 5 lakh crores of OMOs in the next financial year, but that would be much smaller as proportion of total gross supply compared to what we have seen in the last 1 year. What it means for investors, all of this is you have to be very conscious of relative value, which to us on the fixed income curve currently exists at the front end of the non-SLR curve, the corporate bond plus bank CD curve, with the caveat that your holding period has to be long enough for this temporary stress on credit to deposit ratios to morph into easier liquidity environment once busy season turns to lean season. The GSEC curve we are slightly more suspicious of, given that once RBI steps back, we need to see how demand supply pans out and where those yields adjust at. We don't think GSEC yields are excessively high in India. You compare that to relative movements from across the world, and we are pretty much in line. In fact, the governor himself mentioned that they reflect global factors as well. Portfolio stances remain slightly or reasonably defensive on duration, some cash, quasi cash, underweight SLR, and running up to 3-year corporate bonds. Again, this is as we are thinking about things today, and it may change in the future.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.